Hello again, my lovelies, and welcome back to another reading of Avatar, The Legend of Percy, Trial by Fire. Thank you so much for tuning in, and don't forget to check out the links in the descriptions towards WardofWinters' original works, as well as their Discord and Tumblr. Sorry, I am still recovering from the sickness from before, but I will do my best. So without further ado, let's start with WardofWinters, Avatar, The Legend of Percy, Trial by Fire, written by WardofWinters, Chapter 8, The Prince of the Sea. Today we will have Triton's point of view, and Poseidon actually should take a hint. Fish were terrible gossips. Everyone in the sea knew that. Triton found their habits of gossiping to be very useful. There was plenty of information to gather from it, but this news... There were whispers of a child skilled in manipulating water in the rivers of New York. No parent to be seen. A child with legs and a mortal smell, yet dripping in salt water and seaweed all the same. The child's presence was fainter than any demigod of the seas would be, yet he was powerful. Perhaps the child of a minor river god was learning that power? As the prince of the sea and heir of Poseidon, it was one of his responsibilities to ensure that such children were checked and, if needed, handled their care. Thus he went to see them. This was no minor sea demigod. The water swirled around at his command. He whispered to the river, and it whispered back, the eyes of the local gods on him. His control was better than half of the students of Analia Verainava, Atlantis' elite academy. The boy froze the water as easily as he raised a coil to remove pollution. As if Tevemoa wasn't a rare skill for any of not the icy realms of the north. And there was no ice in his presence. If anything, he reminded Triton of his birth waters, warm and rich in the Mediterranean. The amount of skill he portrayed. Oh, Triton could have assumed the child was of Sedna, or another northern god, but his presence alone would dissuade Triton. And that was without seeing his eyes, sea-green pools that reflected the river around him, the hallmark of Poseidon's children. Triton watched his half-brother for a time. He was unsure what to do about him. He was alone, but clearly cared for in some capacity. The jacket was nice and his clothes worn, but cared for, and yet there was no teachers instructing him, not even one disguised as Poseidon would normally do. The boy was also not following any training sequence Triton knew of, and he knew many, so there was no chance of him having been instructed any other time, and working through training alone. He had been confused at the start of watching the boy, for he was raising water out of the river and then putting it back. But now he understood. The child was cleaning the river. Triton wasn't sure why. The pollution was great and every bit helped, of course, but most children did not care to clean the waters. Had he lost something? So Triton continued to watch, studying the boy and trying to understand his actions. He was clearly noticed, but the boy seemed used to the eyes of the local river gods, and did not react much. He continued to raise the water, spin arcs around him with bright eyes as he shaped stars and cats and fish and spun them all around him. The light shone on him as they splashed down. A wave rising as he swirled large swashes of water around him, out away from him. Ice crackled across water, hardening rapidly as the boy worked out in the deeper water, solid and thick and steady. Triton questioned the local fish, finding an eel close to the child, who informed him that the boy had been cleaning for almost 2 seasons. Nothing seemed to add up about this spawn of his Metuo. His presence was dim, drenched in mortality, for all he was not. His power and knowledge was not reflected in his existence, and yet Triton could not sense the strongest of protections on him. He had no teacher, yet improved quickly, clearly working through some form of training, working towards some goal. He cleaned the river freely, asking nothing of the local fish or creatures in exchange. Triton had had enough of watching. It was time to speak to his half-brother. His name was Percy. Percy knew nothing about his heritage. There wasn't the slightest hint of knowing his father was more than human, was a god. There was no knowledge that his powers were a gift, an inheritance. He didn't even know the gods were real and present. He hadn't even begun to mention them to Triton, who was himself one. There was no sign of recognizing Triton for who he was. Triton was confused. All of his Metuno children in the past had known at least something. Every single one had some knowledge, be it from their mortal parent teaching them as Poseidon wished, with knowledge shared by Poseidon, or by a tutor sent by Poseidon to ensure his child would have knowledge of their heritage. It was usually not much. There wasn't a huge amount to do with the ancient laws in place, but the children would know who they were, would know their other half, the culture and beliefs and practices and powers. Yet Percy called his tevumo. Thermomancy would be its closest equivalent in English, Triton believed. Waterbending, as if it were simple paipave. Controlling water and manipulating water and ice as if they were one and the same, with all the steps in between, were not the same thing. And yet he treated them as such. The more Triton watched, the more he worried. The boy was alone, with no guidance, and a mortal parent that was clearly not present, or if they were, not guiding him. And it was winter, a dangerous time for mortals. He knew many died in winter in older years, and even in recent times they grew weaker in such time. Percy was too young to risk his health like that. And to do so, to practice in the water with no guidance? He could make a fatal mistake with no one to know. This could not stand, but Triton was unsure of what to do about it. The boy had asked Triton if Triton was named after himself. Triton had to resist the laugh that wanted to escape. What a question! The innocence was refreshing, yet equally worrisome. His brother was a dangerous combination of powerful yet ignorant, and Triton could not allow that to continue. But all the same, Percy desperately needed every little protection. Triton was still unsure of what to do, but for the time, he decided to teach Percy himself. His father was hiding Percy's existence for some reason. The vow? Not even informing his mevu like he'd sworn to do. Triton would respect his Metua and Arila in this, but he could not allow Percy to be uneducated all the same. He would keep the gods secret, but Percy would learn his culture. Triton really should have informed Poseidon about Percy the moment he realized. If his Metu didn't already know of Percy, then it was Triton's responsibility to inform him. And yet, his Metu surely had known of him, especially with the vow in place. And if he knew and was keeping it silent, then should Triton bring it up? And should he be keeping silent? Triton had another issue. Percy had no teacher. He had no one checking up on him. There was no one of the sea present, no one to guide or protect him. No tutor, no guard, no nothing. Yes, his Metu could normally not do much, but he always did what he could. So why did he not do anything here? He told no one, gave Percy nothing. And Vitrite, Triton's Mevu, had a deal with Poseidon that she would be informed of all his illicit children. It was their agreement. He could be with any he wished so long as she knew of any children resulting from the union. Yet she was not informed. So Triton, in almost petty act for himself, took his Mevuno side in this matter, though still did not defy his Mevu and Arila. He did not know his Metuno reasons, and that was part of the issue. So he did not inform his Metu, but he respected his choice all the same and did not inform his Mevu either. He did not try to hide it. Such an act would go beyond keeping silent, but he didn't go out of his way to advertise it. He tended to visit on days that his Metu was busy, and took extra messages on his free time to seem busy. He wondered at times if his Metu was watching in some way, he did not know, a way that would hide his gaze from all looking on Percy, but he doubted it. He wondered if that was why his Metu did not watch Percy, for he knew that all would be able to sense his gaze should they be near him. Did he know Percy was skilled in Tevemoa? Did he know that his control would reach mastery levels in just a few years? Did he know that Percy's aimed to clean the river? Or how his hair was getting longer? Or how small he was? He didn't think his Metu knew, and he felt a pang at that. His Metu always cared for his children, but sometimes in protecting them, well, Triton knew there was a reason. Whatever it was, he liked to think it was a good reason, even. And yet, he was angry for Percy and for himself. His Metu didn't trust him, didn't trust his Mefu with the knowledge of this child. Whatever the reason he had shown, that they were not trusted with the secret. Perhaps he didn't know, perhaps this was a misunderstanding, but Triton could not find it in himself to believe that. Percy's education was being crippled to keep him hidden, but he knew that he was hiding him. He knew that it was probably to keep Percy safe, but... Triton shook his head. The reason did not matter. Not now. Percy needed guidance, and Triton was here, and more than willing to give it where his Metu did not. The two river gods of the rivers were growing too interested in Percy with Triton there, so he'd had to run them off. They had better things to do anyways, like perhaps cleaning their own Vak rivers. They shamed all river gods by sitting by and leaving a child to do all the work. Triton's half-brother was very skilled in Tevemoa. It was undeniable. For all he called it waterbending instead of Tevemoa, or even thermomancy, to use in the English term. But Triton knew that Tevemoa, Paipave really, was only one skill of a child of the sea, and Percy was entirely untrained in weapons. That would need to change. They would start with a trident, as was proper. It was the traditional weapon of the Poseidon family, and it would be an insult to his heritage to not learn to use it. Of course, the boy had to turn to Tevemoa even in weapons, crafting a trident of ice when Triton had been about to summon one for him. It was brittle, roughly shaped, and easy to fracture, but it was balanced and clearly a trident. Triton was impressed. It shattered in a single blow for the first time, but over the time it grew stronger and stronger, and Triton knew how rare such a skill was, particularly to form a shape at the growing speed Percy had. Percy would be powerful one day. Triton was very confused by how his half-brother got expelled. Who expelled a child for obeying instructions? Who cared if they were dropped in a shark tank? Sharks were darlings, not the slightest bit dangerous. He'd had dozens of pet sharks over the years, and many more companions. They were less mischievous than octopi. But really, the fact that it was blamed on Percy when it was clearly the guide's fault? Well, perhaps the guide would enjoy being introduced to a true sea monster. Percy was too far behind in literally everything except Tevemoa, where he was miles ahead of his peers. If he'd been raised in the sea, he would have known the basics of law, history, culture, movements, speech, fighting, and more. He'd known of the magics of the sea and known his position. Most of his half-siblings didn't have nearly that knowledge. They did live their lives on land. Their education was always focused more on that, though they would learn their culture, their history. But Percy was here and interacting with the sea already. He needed to be taught more. Percy was an Aipri. He was one of the sea princes. Or Triton felt he should have been one. That was up to his Metu officially, but Percy was at the least a Rakil. Thankfully, Triton could teach Percy without worrying of keeping him ignorant of the gods. Ignorance wasn't the best protection, but it was certainly better than nothing. Percy already believed merfolk had their own underwater society, which he was right, but the gods were intimately connected to that. Triton could work with that, though, so he gathered books, free of references of the gods beyond their worship, and handed them off to Percy, along with a dictionary to Halmaheran. He knew land dwellers couldn't really know Halmaheran, but all the same, what were they teaching them? There was so much going on in the sea. It was miserable. First, there was some foolish submarine expedition that interrupted a deep-sea diving class. It was very important to learn how to regulate your breathing and adjust yourself to the temperature and pressure. Triton had to slip the mortals' minds away from it, convincing them it was a technological error and lack of sleep that made them see merfolk, when it was clearly just some fish. Then the moonfall protests happened, protesting the oil drilling the land dwellers were doing. They wanted Poseidon to destroy the drills and free the sea of them. They were right to be worried, but unfortunately destroying the drills wouldn't stop the land dwellers for long, and ran the risk of oil spilling out. Of course, shortly after the spring equinox, they were vindicated, though no one was pleased about that. A massive oil spill occurred. Some oil drilling ring in the Gulf of Mexico exploded. Something within faulty and it sank. This released the oil within and opened the drill hole to leak thousands of galleons into the ocean. It was a massive rescue operation to save as many as possible. Merfolk had to be relocated, aided in cleaning and given medical attention for any oil absorbed or taken in by their gills. Millions, if not tens of millions of sea creatures had to be rescued, cleaned and moved. Territories were upset, the food chain disrupted in many locations, and the oil poisoned thousands. Purifiers were out in droves to lessen the effects of the spill, to clean even a little bit from the water. They tried to contain it, raising lines of cleansing energy around the edges of the oil spill, but it was just too much. They couldn't stop it all, even when guiding the ocean currents to keep it contained to that part of the ocean. The uomiet aimapep, the earate imote strengthened at least kept it from some shores and kept it from spreading further, but the oil was doing massive damage. Safe areas were made, purifying bubbles were formed, injured and sick from the puhipata were taken to safety, given medical attention and checked over. Many would likely never recover fully, long-term side effects weakening them, infecting their gills, making them sick and compromising their immune systems. Their livers were malfunctioning, and based on reports from prior oil spills, many would have issues with reproduction. The young and elderly were having particularly difficult times of it. Mages were out in swarms to handle the mess, guiding currents, cleansing the water, healing the sick and injured, gathering the animals in the puhipata and healing them. There was so much to do, so many to rescue. There just wasn't enough time. Much coral within the area of the immediate oil spill was stressed and dying. Many sea creatures were sick, dead, dying or washing up on shore and dying there. Oil covered the ocean floor several inches deep, and more was spreading to the surface. Thankfully, there was some hope in Thetis creating a bacteria, or improving a previous bacteria to eat the oil. A slow but helpful addition. The mortals were doing their own things to help, cleaning up sections, helping the animals on the shore, siphon it out. They poured something in the water to break up the oil. They were the cause, but they did try to help. But it took 3 months for the oil spill to be capped, to stop the oil from spilling out and poisoning the sea. It took another month before Triton could even begin to step back and breathe. The cleanup would take many more years. Checking on Percy was soothing, like a freshly snapped sand dollar. He made sure Percy had done his readings and practiced Halmaheran, speaking to him in the language so he could get practice. Percy was doing well, and he was pleased. He was suspicious about the river, though. It was dirtier than when he left. His half-brother had just called him a great friend. Triton hadn't realized they were friends. He hadn't had one since, they hadn't made it to the current day. And then, of course, Athena. The less said about her, the better. He supposed he could accept his half-brother calling him a friend. It was better than him guessing their relationship. It certainly meant nothing to Triton. He was a god. He was not attached to this mortal, even if it was his brother. The little Pemapo didn't tell Triton about his birthday. Birthdays were important milestones. The 10th Veruo was the year that children could join in on activities, though Percy shouldn't until his education had improved. This would not stand, though. Triton couldn't do nothing for Percy's birthday. Triton made sure to give Percy his presents soon after that, though he also discovered that some man, smelly Gabe, wouldn't allow his brother to celebrate his birthday properly. He had some nerve stopping a child from celebrating their birthday. But today was for Percy, so he tucked his anger away and watched over Percy as he pulled out the sand dollar he'd made. Triton could make dozens, hundreds if he wanted to, but he made a large number for the oil spill cleanup, but purification wasn't his strong suit, and all the best were at the Gulf, including some that had been saved for hundreds of years. He'd taken some time to make these the proper way for Percy, the traditional way, rather than the rush way. They would absorb power naturally and be all the stronger for it. He gifted both the sand dollars and the bracelet to Percy for his birthday. The bracelet's coral conch shell charm would keep him updated on Percy's health. He had a feeling he'd want that in the future. Triton didn't understand his brother's obsession with Tevemoa. He knew many went above and beyond, and it was truly advanced magic, yes. But he was already ahead. Now was the time to hone other skills, so he wouldn't become reliant on divine power alone. Besides, it drifted into Toxai Tahuhu to start learning how to draw water from plants. It was dangerous to reach there without proper training or guidance. Percy was not in war. He didn't need to focus his skills in that direction. Plus, his divine power was that of a mortal. It would strain it to reach too far beyond. Stretching out one's power needed to be done carefully. He could make a solid trident and would soon have a practice one of his own. There was no need to work on more advanced Tevemoa. So Triton worked to distract Percy, drilling him in physical training and preparing him for any battles to come. Triton had not succeeded at distracting his brother, and Percy had found the time to learn to draw water from plants. He was very excited about it as well. It was an impressive skill, if only because it was something most in the sea had no need for, being surrounded by water, and thus never bothered to learn. Only those who expected to fight on land worked to learn the skill, or those that wished to gain expertise in Toxai Tahuhu. Triton would not be able to stop Percy's interest in such forms of magic, it seemed, but he could guide him away from the more dangerous areas. He'd give Percy guidance and instruction, give him a focus for his curiosity, and ensure that he would not endanger himself with it. At least for a time it would mean less strain on himself and safety from the risks that came with Toxai Tahuhu. Triton was very touched by the gift Percy had given him. Percy had made him a bracelet. He knew Percy knew the meaning. It was in the books of undersea culture Percy had been assigned to read. Percy had made Triton a bracelet as a gift. It was a powerful show of how much he valued Triton's friendship. He could feel the power Percy had unknowingly woven into it as well, dedicating himself to such a gift. It was a gift and devotional act in one, something prepared with care, the colors matching Triton and the charm to match his own weapon. Triton's own gift could not compare. The trident was a good gift, but it was an expected gift, if not until his 13th Veruo. It wasn't made by himself, nor customized for Percy. It was merely a practice trident, something practical and impersonal. and it was something Poseidon really should have been the one to gift him as well, but Metu was busy pretending Percy didn't exist to the world. Triton still understood there was a reason, but looking at his brother, he couldn't help but feel bitter on Percy's behalf. But Percy seemed pleased with the gift, and so Triton simply made a personal vow to get better gifts in the future. Triton felt the strain of catching Percy up to all others in the ocean. He didn't have the time to teach him everything he needed to know, so he had to prioritize. Current events were the main focus, and the kingdom's territories, rulers, and basic customs of each kingdom of the sea. And of course, the magics of the sea. Those were the most vital bits of information for Percy. Should he be expected to be a proper Aipri, then he needed that information. Triton would make sure he was ready. Triton was rarely surprised. And indeed, he was not quite surprised here, but he was impressed. He'd long since made guesses as to the forms of magic Percy would likely be best at, if only because of his skills in Tevemoa. Those skills were extremely rare, the kind that were envied by masters who, for how quickly one could learn and coveted in apprentices. Triton wondered at times if there was something else in his heritage that lent aid to such skills. For though he sensed nothing lining up divine power, there were other kinds of powers one could have. Triton did expect Percy to also hold some skill in Siren's song, due to his Metu being Poseidon, but most of Poseidon's children had some talent in the song, however small, and Percy did not seem to be an exception. It was there in how he whispered to the sea, in how he asked and called to it. He couldn't do any proper songs. He was too young, and the effects would be severe for him. But he had a talent. Only true naturals could risk learning sooner than 14, the lungs uniquely suited for handling the song. And then, due to Percy's determination to clean the river, Triton had guessed he would gain a skill in Vapaloa, or purification. It was once valued for its lead into curse breaking, but with the pollution choking the world, it was now valued for itself. Percy had displayed a clear subconscious skill for it. His skill with Tevemoa were a natural talent, to be sure, but they had been honed for 3 years without training, and the kind of single-minded focus that only a child with a special interest seemed capable of. That was what Percy called it, his own mother apparently stating that it was an aspect of his neurodivergency. Those skills were Percy's focus, and it showed in how quickly he'd excelled in them. If he'd shown that same dedication to Vapaloa, then he'd no doubt be equally far in the skill, but instead he'd given it a side focus. This did not prevent improvement, if only as a result of him cleaning the rivers. His powers interacted instinctively with the grime and his desire to clean. The water around him cleansed with his mere presence, and the items gathered purged of dirt and grime quickly, and the water he spiraled up and out of the river released the various toxins and pollution much easier than the norm. And of course, Percy couldn't slowly work his way up in the skills. No, that would be too simple. Though Triton did have to take some responsibility in not providing him with the beginner's guide to the matter. Percy had skipped straight to the advanced stuff the moment he'd decided to work on his purification. Sand dollars were extremely valuable and extremely hard to make for most. Triton could form them with a thought. He was a god. but to form them the natural way, it took high levels of skills and control that were uncommon, and they were all the more valued for it. Particularly should they have been allowed to sit for many years to gather power. No sand dollars had the value of the ones kept in Atlantis' vaults for the last few thousand years, not even ones made by Poseidon or Okeanos, or even Thetis. Most kingdoms of the sea had sand dollars stored in such a manner. And in this, Percy had an advantage. He'd spent the last few years honing his control of water, not able to do big things in the river, and thus focused on intricate levels of control. His practice in controlling multiple flows of water at once allowed him to do the multiple aspects of forming a sand dollar with more ease than most. Those that went into Wapaloa to make sand dollars usually had a primary focus on Wapaloa, putting other magics to the side except in how it would help Wapaloa. But Percy was focused on Tevemoa, and that made all the difference for him. He used Tevemoa with Wapaloa to form the sand dollars, showing a rare knack for them. Oh, he certainly wasn't able to create a proper sand dollar yet, but even the basic shape and beginnings of support within were far more than most could do. His Tevemoa allowed him the fine control to shape the sand dollar, and his Wapaloa gave him the skill to imbue it with the proper power. Triton needed to encourage such skill. Triton did not understand land schooling. What kind of principal expelled a child for being next to an exhibit that collapsed? It certainly wasn't Percy's fault. No child could collapse a properly placed exhibit just by standing near it. If it weren't for the fact that the museum had excused Percy's fault, then Triton would have dealt with them himself. But Percy was excused, and so Triton distracted him from the unfair expulsion. He buried him in history assignments and weapon training, catching him up in all the areas he was lacking. They worked on swords quite a bit. They were a common weapon both in sea and on land. Knives would be good next. They were a solid gift. He should probably teach him spears. Triton took a slow breath. Not spears. Not yet. But they would work more on his trident as well. It was the weapon of Poseidon, and the one Percy certainly had to master. Those filthy monarchy are tough. They dared to inform Percy that he was a demigod. They dared to ruin a layer of his protection. They dared to endanger Percy. Percy had questions, naturally, and Triton had to answer them. If he didn't, Percy could seek out knowledge from less credible sources, or even endanger himself. He promised to answer them. He had to, but he needed to be careful. Percy was actually in enough danger exploring his powers so much already, and Triton didn't know how much his mother's protection stood on him. He didn't want to risk destroying another layer of his protection. But first, he needed to pay a little visit to those minor river gods. They wouldn't be missed. Triton smiled and nodded along with the generals speaking to him about some matter regarding training. He knew this was important. They had a lot of work to handle with conflicts rising from the oil spill. But he was still bored. And he very much wanted to be speaking with Percy instead. It was relaxing. He could drop his mask and just spend time with his little brother. He understood why the gods had the laws against being too close to their mortal children. He would much rather be with Percy than doing his responsibilities alongside his Metu. His only reassurance of Percy's safety was the conch shell pin he wore. Its steady presence let him know Percy was safe. But still, when he was away, he worried. He should give Percy a way to escape from danger. Explaining the history of the gods to his little brother was difficult. He had to take care. His brother was in enough danger already. Triton didn't want to endanger him more. Ignorance was a shield, and Triton dreaded being the one to pull that shield away. It was too late to hide the information from Percy, but he couldn't get rid of all that protection. He would keep the land from Percy. Perhaps that would allow some shield of ignorance from him, keeping him from looking at the godly world on land, where his greatest dangers were. And so Triton explained the most basics of the land gods, explaining the dangers of learning more, and then told him more of the sea. He answered as many questions as he could, tying it to the ocean as much as possible. He would keep Percy safe. Percy's skill in Vapaloa were improving quickly. Triton was glad. The gift Percy gave him was very impressive. If unrefined, the purification energy wouldn't last long, but the fact that it was there at all showcased skill. Triton was quite reassured his brother had an escape route now. With the poturu that he gave Percy, it would bring him straight to Triton when broken. And no one would look twice at a very pretty pearl on his bracelet. Percy would have an escape from danger, though Triton hoped he wouldn't be needed. Of course, that wasn't the only gift. Triton also gave Percy a book on the Siren Song as well. It wasn't a big book, just one explaining the song and how to prepare to use it. The song was too dangerous to allow Percy to start practicing on his own. That would wait till he was older. An instrument would do well, or for that, perhaps an ocarina soon. It wasn't good for any to practice using the song until the age of 14 at the earliest. It was hard to turn off the song once you started using it. Children of Aphrodite and naturals were the rare exceptions. Percy was certainly not a natural from what Triton could see. Percy was attracting monsters. Triton was not pleased. This had to be the result of him finding out about the gods. They were just lucky it was a young and weaker Empusai. The younger ones were slow to reform usually, and thus wouldn't be able to tell others of Percy. Percy was very lucky. Clearly water was Percy's go-to though. A trident wouldn't help Percy if he didn't or couldn't use it. Triton would need to start drilling him in how to weaponize water, rather than just using it for support. Triton was increasingly pleased with Percy's interest in Tahuhu. He had a great affinity with Tevemoa and Vapaloa, and through training could be skilled in several more magics. Such affinities as Tevemoa and Vapaloa usually came with other drawbacks, or of various natures. Triton was unsure what they may be for Percy, but it didn't seem to be health or physical weakness. It was likely he'd have a very tough time with some other magic, or some other rarer issue. Of course, it was possible his mortal half would balance it out. He couldn't recall much of his Metunoch other children. If they had drawbacks of some kind, he had no way of knowing. Though he did remember his Mevu mentioning that Theseus wasn't even able to breathe in the ocean. Nonetheless, he was more than happy to help Percy learn more, even if it meant he had to study up more himself. He'd never paid much attention to those classes, and Pallas, well, she hadn't had a huge interest in it herself. Triton had to spend a lot of time studying sea magics, so he could teach Percy about them. He didn't have much time to himself these days as a result. He still had all his other duties after all, but it was okay. Metu was pleased with his new interest. Ugh. Triton was very annoyed. He did not like land schools. Despite the Cyclopes he set over to watch Percy, this still happened. The school was just as idiotic as the last 5. It was like Percy was cursed. It cursed when it came to schools. Triton gave Percy a rainbow stone. Making them was ridiculously hard, and most who made them tended to specialize as such. They made good money from it, though rainbow stones weren't the most popular method of communication. Triton could make one himself, but if he did so, then it would hold his power, and that was easy to trace for other gods. So he'd had to pay someone else to make it. Thankfully, he was able to get Natia to do so. He was a very skilled Aimuto Imote. The best he knew, her rainbow stones were well valued. He personally added the protections. He didn't trust her, nor anyone else, to not tap into it. The stones were shaped like most gems, though this one was longer, more oblong. It was a dark stone flecked with rainbow shades. Channeling just a dash of power into it would make it shine a rainbow. He also supplied his brother with enough drachmas to pay for any calls he needed. He was very touched by the hairpin his brother made for him. It was very well made and shaped just like his trident. But what really impressed him were the sand dollars. They were far from perfect, even far from functional, but they could release purifying energy, and that was better than some of the sand dollars made for the oil spill. They'd been desperate. Percy's skill in water bending were from quite a bit of training and some natural talent, but his purification skills were clearly a gift. Metu was confused by Triton's new hairpin, though. It wasn't his style. Triton normally wore. Triton didn't tell him. Triton did not like that his little brother's school didn't accommodate his differences. Surely there had to be some law to accommodate his needs. He had learning disabilities and was of the sea and a demigod. They couldn't really expect him to learn the way unaffected mortals on land could. Triton was now seriously considering the curse theory in regards to Percy's schools. There was a small introductory event coming up between some of the younger, greatly skilled or highly ranked merfolk. He'd helped at some before, mainly as favors or for mares that caught his eyes for their skill. He thought this one would be a good, if late, introduction for Percy. He would need to make a background for Percy, though, to explain his lateness and his guardianship. They wouldn't suspect anything, not with Triton there. Percy's reaction to the form shift stone was amusing. He was quite delighted, and it was adorable. He didn't want him to lose that joy. Triton would help his little brother out of the mess the prophecy would cause. He wouldn't let Percy go. Not like He would protect Percy at all costs. Triton was proud of how Percy handled the introduction. He managed to show off his skills in a very impressive manner, proved he had the manners to float tall amongst the high-ranked, and demonstrated that he knew how to defend himself politely. Triton handled the one fool that dared to speak out of his turn in his presence, but otherwise let Percy handle it himself. He did need to learn how to handle the courts after all. Triton took Percy to many more events over the summer. He wanted to be sure Percy had a handle on the politics that came with being a prince. He was doing very well, and Triton couldn't be prouder. He did find it a bit amusing how Percy missed a few details, though. For one, color was a big thing in the sea. It worked two ways. One was bright and more visible colors were a warning, and most children of Mare had bright colors regardless if it were natural or not to keep them safe. But dull colors were their own warning. A warning this Mare was an opponent that wouldn't be seen until it was too late. Percy was an example of the bright variety. His tail was a turquoise that glittered in the faintest of light, and his fins shone in the dark. It held attention from several. In turn, Percy had befriended many dangerous or powerful Mare. Samoa was all white, her tails glittering like diamonds. Her hair wasn't naturally white, but that didn't change the threat in her appearance. She was extremely good at Wapaloa, though, and in a different way than Percy. That difference could have been due to her learning the traditional way, rather than just doing what caught her attention. She was likely in the least dangerous of his friends. Elay was another friend of his, with bright red hair and a deep red tail that appeared green in the dark of the ocean. Her tail was remarkably sleek and her fins were strong. She was a wickedly fast swimmer. On top of that, she was the daughter of one of Mituno's generals, and was well trained as a result. She was quite deadly with a sword, and was practiced in various others. She helped Percy train in weapons quite a bit. Then there was Messina, a genius in controlling ocean currents. They could weave them in many ways experts couldn't even begin to imagine. They were only a little older than Percy, but in contrast to Percy, who was a natural at purification but focused on his water bending, Messina was a natural at ocean currents and focused on them. Their blue, yellow, and pink tail was very flowy, though didn't glow in the dark like Percy's. They tried only once to teach Percy about the currents. Percy was quickly overwhelmed, though. He'd spent most of his time focusing on details and thus was not quite able to do something as vast as ocean currents. He nearly lost himself to them, and if not for Messina, he might have. That was fine, though, something to keep in mind. He had the potential to be easily overwhelmed by the power of the sea. Triton did find it a bit amusing. This was a place he struggled, and made a mental note of it. This was possibly the drawback of his other skills, which was strange since most who were good in Tevemoa, or waterbending as Percy said, were good at the currents. Moving on to his friends, there was also Rosa, another friend that Percy made. She was a younger diviner, very good at seeing the future. They were planning to get an apprenticeship when she turned 16. Currently, Xei worked with her parents to protect endangered species and told Percy quite a bit about them. Then there was Fetu and Lagi. They were the most dangerous of Percy's friends in Triton's opinion. Not only were both of them extremely powerful themselves, though Lagi in healing and thus not as much of a danger, just being around him could improve one's health, and he had to be shielded when around too many. One day he would be an incredible healer. But Fetu? Fetu was very much a natural at the siren's song, and from what Triton had heard, half of his training was learning to turn it off. It was worse than most of Aphrodite's children from what Triton knew. He also had none of the side effects that most did, and this combination would lead to him being a true master of it in time. And of course, the biggest threat regarding them as their parents. Their Metua was close to Ryujin, of the Northern Pacific, and Ryujin wasn't the friendliest with Triton's own Metu. He was also powerful himself, and his partner powerful in Siren's song as well. They took after their parents in coloring, with shining gold yellow hair and flowy yellow and orange tails. Triton was both proud and worried of Percy's ability to make friends with such powerful people. It would aid him greatly in the future, but would also draw attention. Triton enjoyed spending the summer solstice with Percy. His gift was also very sweet and well made. Percy had displayed his skills in Tevemoa once more and created a box of ice, with Ivuizav carved in to preserve it. Inside were more sand dollars, still not perfect despite Percy's years of practice. Not that Triton expected him to have mastered them yet. Sand dollars took a long time to learn. But these ones even drew power, which was a great improvement. They still leaked a bit of power, but they were getting better. In turn, Triton gifted Percy a coral hairpin. It would help keep his hair out of his face in battles, or just daily life. It was also possibly maybe enchanted to purify any poisons he ingested from his system. Very few poisons would be able to harm Percy as it was already, with his purification skills that they were, but the pin would keep the few remaining from harming him. Of course, it was an entirely different matter to handle venoms, but there was no real risk of that for Percy. Getting Percy the enchanted ocean skin for his birthday required a bit of work. Making them was obvious. It was creating a direct path to the ocean, and such an action would be very noticeable, and one needed to make a tucked-away spot to draw water from so it wouldn't draw anything else with it. Plus, if Triton made it, it would hold his power and draw attention that way. Thus, he needed to get one already made, preferably one with little to no signature on it. If he asked his Metu or Mefu, they would want to know why. But there was another he could ask, and they were going down to his kingdom for dinner. Okeanos was never truly an enemy after all. Simply the king was, but wasn't. He'd surrendered his bands peacefully and had accepted the depths as his home and realm in compensation. Mefu also cared for him greatly, as he was her Metani, and those facts combined to mean that Triton would be able to speak to him and request an ocean skin. His Metu and Okeanos didn't quite get along, but there was no true conflict, and Mefu insisted on peace. That, along with hospitality rights, ensured Poseidon was always on his best behavior. Thankfully, Okeanos was more than willing to grant Triton an ocean skin, and didn't even ask why, despite the gleam of interest in his eyes. Hopefully he wouldn't try to investigate. Okeanos was very good at investigating. The ocean skin had no signature that Triton could feel, just being of the ocean. That would be perfect for Percy. Percy was delighted to receive it, immediately calling it a water skin, just like Katara's. Triton was too amused to correct him. When Percy returned to school once more, they discovered Percy had gained the sensory aspect of purification. It wasn't quite surprising, not with his natural skill as purification and general sensitivity to the ocean. He'd been working hard on his tahuhu as well. The sensory aspects were quite useful, and sensors were commonly employed in war and general scouting to keep an eye out for dangerous magics or threats. Metu always had a skilled Vakasta Itenai check gifts given in court. Triton retrieved Percy more books on purification to help him learn more. Perhaps he would get interested in curse breaking. It had long been considered the most useful aspect of purification, though nowadays the cleansing aspect was more helpful. He wondered how quickly Percy would get the hang of it. The fall equinox had quite a lovely variety of foods that Percy made. Triton quite liked them, which was a problem since they were all blue and he'd started enjoying blue foods as well. That was difficult to explain to Metu. He wondered vaguely how Metu wasn't aware of his interactions with Percy yet, but then Triton wasn't exactly sharing information. Triton was quite pleased with the clothes he'd found for Percy for the winter solstice. He'd never bought them before, and he could make them, but, well, he wanted to support the makers and get something made by the sea, by its citizens. They'd gotten some looks, and Metu had questioned him about if he'd found a lover. Perhaps Metu thought he had his own child to buy clothes for. Triton had sneered. First off, a land dweller as a lover? Triton had no interest in that. But any lover at all? His Metu knew he had no interest in that. He'd made that clear when he formed Pallas himself, which might have explained Metu's confusion when asking him, but still! Metu needed to hush about that. Triton didn't want to deal with rumors too. Honestly, merfolk were almost as big as gossips as fish. Triton did not like Percy's English teacher. They had it out for him. Triton was actually checking him for curses, but other than the normal one for the children of the sea, there was nothing. Maybe it was discreet? Regardless, he suggested that Percy practice his etiquette. Perhaps being extra well behaved would stop the teacher's annoying self. He was quite impressed by the stone horse Percy enchanted. It was obviously done by a novice, but it was good work. It clung to the horse more than his previous attempts with stone. He kept it in his room, and it made him feel just a little bit safer. Triton had always enjoyed the equinox. If only for the hunt and the festivals. It was an enjoyable time, even when his siblings didn't visit. But the time with Percy in the recent years was very enjoyable. He liked trading gifts, even if not part of the holiday originally for him. This year, Percy got him a sunflower preserved in ice, and he was truly delighted. He'd only seen sunflowers a few times, but now he had one to keep. He added it to his shelf, next to the treasured gifts from his Mepoof. Poseidon had noticed and was once more confused. Triton ignored his confusion, and Mevuno. Triton decided to get Percy something he'd loved as a child, a starstone. With them, you could look at the stars even in the depths of the ocean, projecting them all around you. When you weren't projecting them, they would simply swirl in the stone. It was like the snow globes Percy mentioned to him. He thought his little brother would appreciate it. It was a gift from Metu Triton had treasured, and he thought it was a crime Percy hadn't gotten one. Percy's latest school, or well, his last school, had a mysterious flooding incident that was just maybe, Triton's fault, but they deserved it. The pathetic excuse of an English teacher got Percy expelled for no good reason. Something about him being a known troublemaker and not being a good student anyways. The little ufanto. On a less infuriating note, he took advantage of Percy's free time to get him more books on Vapaloa. He knew why Percy failed to free the once guinea pig, now goldfish, from the curse. Percy brought the fish to him, which allowed him to note the familiar signature on it. Kirke. Kirke the witch, also known as Circe to land dwellers. She was much too powerful for Percy's current level, even if he knew how. She tended to weave her curses, and unraveling a weave took quite a bit of skill, just in general. But doing so with a level of power able to counter her own? Percy wouldn't be managing that anytime soon. His attempt at releasing it simply twisted the weave, morphing it into something more of a water and less of land. It was pretty good for a first attempt. Triton got Percy some more new clothes for the next holiday. He wanted to be sure Percy had everything he needed before reaching camp, and also he just liked seeing his little brother light up with gifts. He deserved nicer things than what he had. Triton knew Percy's Mevua was doing her best, but the land realm simply didn't allow them to get what they deserved. He wondered why his Betu didn't bring her and her child down to the ocean. Surely Mevu would have allowed it. Well, Triton would take care of Percy. He was doing quite well if he said so himself, and maybe a small part of him wanted to shove it in Metuno's face, that he had been the one to care for and raise Percy. Poseidon had stayed away. It was Triton who was in Percy's life. Also, he got Percy and Ocarina to begin practice playing. He wouldn't start with Siren's Song for a few more years, but this would let him prepare. Triton adored the geode snow globe Percy made him. It glittered brilliantly, and when he shook it, it spiraled with fake snow. Triton didn't get to see snow very often. Plus, the geode matched his tail. He couldn't help his amusement when Percy sulked over his mom not approving of the hair dye. The dye was quite loved in the sea, and Samoa's improvements were coveted, let alone had caught the attention to get her a position in higher courts. The way it bled into the hair as a whole kept the original color from showing, even at the roots for a few years. Hair color was a good way of protecting children, making them bright and brilliant so they were all left alone. As such, it was rare to see brown or black or dark hair in general in the sea, at least for children. Even blonde wasn't the most common, though yellow and gold were seen. As Mare grew older, they were more willing to allow their natural hair to shine through. Thus colors like Triton's own dark blue appeared. But such dark shades weren't very common in general. Triton quite liked Percy's new hair color though, especially after Samoa said he was trying to make it the same shade as Triton's. It was adorable. Triton decided Percy needed something to keep his belongings safe. It definitely had nothing to do with hearing one of his bird messengers mention how there were so many thieves around one of the docks they were watching. He just didn't want Percy's belongings to be at risk. Plus, Percy would be going to a camp within the next few years and was growing up. He wanted to be sure Percy didn't need to worry of his belongings. So Triton got one of his own messenger bags, made by the Cyclopes. It only allowed the owner to remove things and protected the inside from all outside forces. He was glad Percy seemed to like it. He really needed all the help he could get. Triton just hoped his gifts were enough to help. Percy was being sent to a boarding school. Triton did his best to support Percy in it, as he seemed upset as well, but he was a lot less pleased than he let on. Percy would be away much farther inland. He wouldn't be able to see him in person, and he would be harder to reach and teach and protect. He was very glad that he'd given Percy the Rainbow Stone, else he wasn't sure what he may have done. He was still worried, of course. Percy seemed to draw trouble to him. But surely it was just 1 year. It wasn't like he'd be going back. Not with the curse that was definitely there, even if Triton couldn't find proof. Nothing too horrible could happen in the space of a year, right? Well, wasn't that something? That is quite a much longer chapter than normal, but at least we got to see what Triton's thoughts were in this one. As for the pronunciation of Percy, is because of the letter C in Halmaheran being a letter K, well, spoken like a K, so it is written with an S instead for the pronunciation of Percy. So I thought, why not add a slight accent to it so we understood that it was from a sea dweller instead of our English understanding. As always, to the Halmaheran dictionary, or just translations in total. First off, Analia Verainava, which is Atlantis Elite Academy, meaning is for those on the Discord. Then Tivemoa, which is thermomancy, Mituno, which is dads, Paipave for water control, Mevu for mom, Metua for father, Arila for hiking, Metu for dad, Mevuno for moms, Vak, which is dam, Aipri for prince, Rakil for lord, Omiet Aimapep, loop current, Earate Imote, current guide mage, Puhipata, which is an oil spill water, Pemapo, a brat in an affectionate term, Veruo, which is the storm season, Vapaloa for purification, Toxai Tahuhu, which is devastation magic, Mokiki for moronic, Aretov, which is essentially the F word for people, Poturu, a pearl shield, Tahuhu, which is essentially magic in especially sea, Aimuto Imote, which is an enchanter mage, Ivuisav, which are the runes, Mepani for grandfather, Vakasta Itenae, purification sensors, and Ufanto for bastards. For the terminologies, we have the phonetic spelling of Cersei, which is Kirke, and the same for Cyclopses, which is Kyklopes. WardofWinters also mentioned in her notes, or their notes, that the oil spill mentioned was from a story from an actual oil spill in the Deepwater Horizon that occurred in 2010, which gives us a good time frame on when what is happening in the story, and also in more information scattered in future chapters. Wow. That's 15 years ago. We're old. Anyways, thank you very much for everyone for tuning in, and if you liked it and stuck around until the very end, why don't you consider liking and subscribing to be updated on when I post next? I won't pressure you into clicking the bell button, but you never know if you enjoy it. I might be updating something else soon. On another note, please, in the description you'll find the original work from WardofWinters as well as the links to their Discord and their Tumblr profile. Go and give them all the kudos they deserve. On another note, Take care of yourselves, please. Grab yourself some water or soda, whatever. Just hydrate, not dehydrate, as our rat overlord said. Or take yourself a snack. You deserve a snack. You've been working all day. Or have work ahead. Or if you can, take a nap. Get some rest. Go to sleep. With all that said, take care of all lovelies. See you all next time.